Welcome to the end of the line. We are in chapter 14, and this chapter, even though this is an intro class, was designed to explore specialized and topical issues in criminal justice. The way I like to treat this chapter class is that this is more of a catch-all. This will be a topic that will bring to your understanding some other areas of the criminal justice system, but also it could introduce you to other topics that we offer here. Courses like juvenile justice, although I did that last chapter, but terrorism as a course. We have human trafficking, we have homicide, we have forensic science. Like, these are all unique, fun courses that are offered, and you may say to yourself, yeah, I kind of want to maybe take a class like that, even if you have the space in your major or as an elective. So let's get right into it, shall we? When we think about terrorism, by the way, Homeland Security is also a course that's offered as well. But how would you define terrorism? And what are some words that may come to mind when you hear the term terrorism? Well, here are some of the common terms when you hear the word terrorism. You think about fear, 9/11, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the World Trade Center, domestic terrorism. But these images also come to mind as well. Who can forget what happened on 9/11, that fateful day? I remember exactly where I was on 9/11, 2001. You all wouldn't have been born. Most of you watching this lecture wouldn't have been born, but your parents were born, and you may have other family members. You might even have somebody that was impacted by 9/11. You might think of this individual, Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind 9/11. Public enemy number one for the better part of, almost 20 years, give or take. And of course, you think about terrorists, individuals who are members of either ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but they are there to put forth their will and their ideologies on the rest of society. And of course, there is ISIS, one of the most notorious and ruthless terroristic groups on the planet. So, when looking at terrorism, the definition is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. So, individuals who engage in terrorism or terroristic acts, they are doing so with the intent of pursuing political aims. Now, we have two types of terrorism, right? We have international terrorism. All this is that it occurs outside the United States. And the FBI gives us three elements of terrorism. One, the act must violate federal or state law and involves violence or acts that are dangerous to humans. As you saw from the images, planes flying into the Twin Towers is an absolutely dangerous act. And it's a dangerous act to all civilization, for that matter. The purpose of the act must be to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence government policy by intimidation or coercion, or to influence the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. So again, it's designed to intimidate this government into doing what the terrorists want done. And then lastly, the act occurs outside the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. In other words, it's another country. So if somebody flies a plane into, let's say, a major monument overseas, that is an international terroristic event. Now, terrorism can be summed up in one key word, and as you see people running, this was after, I believe, one of the towers that collapsed. Again, another iconic image, but it can be summed up in one key word: fear. See, terrorists operate in such a manner that they want to instill fear into the hearts and minds of the people who are being attacked. And even though a lot of this focus on the lecture is about terrorism that happens right here in the United States, what is noteworthy is that terrorists operate through the use of fear because they want the individuals that they are targeting to fear them. And through fear, the belief is that they will have their demands met, and the government or the regime or whoever's in charge will essentially cave to their will, because people don't want to be afraid. You don't want to be afraid worrying about a bomb going off at a school. You don't want to be afraid worrying about you walking down the street and a bomb is detonated. So fear is a key term used by terrorists. It's a key tactic as well. So the Homeland Security Act of 2002 made the Department of Homeland Security a cabinet-level department, which means that the director reports directly to the President of the United States. Now, the director of the Department of Homeland Security is the DNI. It's the Director of National Intelligence. And again, this person reports directly to the president. So you want to talk about someone that is very powerful in this country, up there with the vice president and, of course, the president and the Speaker of the House. The Director of National Security is right up there. And I talk about this in my criminal theories class, but I want to say right now, I believe we're on our 8th DNI since the inception of the Department of Homeland Security. And we've had back-to-back women. A woman named Avril Haines was the Director of National Intelligence under former President Biden. And then currently our Director of National Intelligence is a woman named Tulsi Gabbard. She was appointed by President Trump. So we've had 8 DNIs, but the last 2 have been women. But when looking at the Department of Homeland Security, it integrates multiple agencies. And here are some of the other agencies that fall under their umbrella. Remember, we talked about law enforcement at the federal level, and we talked about how you have like the FBI, that's under the Department of Justice. Well, remember, the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, the agencies that fall under them include Customs and Border Patrol or Border Protection, Transportation Security Administration, TSA, they handle our airports, or even ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And we know that ICE is in the news right now with raids and roundups, but these all fall under the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security. And actually, I do apologize. The Department of Homeland Security's secretary is Kristi Noem. The DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, operates separately. So the Department of Homeland Security secretary is Kristi Noem. She was the former governor of, I want to say, either South Dakota or North Dakota. But the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, they also have a direct line to the president. It's a very important position. So I wanted to clarify that as well. So in terms of terrorism and the criminal trial, because it's important to know where since we have the 3 components of the criminal justice system, we can apply it to terrorism, right? So we know that from a law enforcement perspective, we know that's one of our primary components. You have the Department of Homeland Security. You even get the FBI involved when it comes to terrorism as well. Customs and Border Protection, TSA, like all these agencies have a pivotal role to try to stop terrorists before they can hijack a plane or take over a location. Well, we also have to talk about terrorism or terrorists on trial. And so domestic and international terrorists are usually tried in federal courts, and they're all successfully convicted. You will never have a case where a terrorist will beat terrorism charges and not face a conviction. It just will not happen. So in some cases, you have people like Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, or Faisal Shahzad. He attempted to detonate a car bomb in Times Square. So again, these are individuals who face trial, were convicted, and face significant penalties up to and sometimes including death. But 9/11 raised concerns regarding evidence and national security interests, and it also raised questions as to where terrorists should be housed when convicted. So I want you to ponder this thought. Should terrorists be given a fair trial under the 6th Amendment? Remember, way back in the courts chapter, several weeks ago, several modules ago, we talked about how we have constitutional amendments, right? Our 4th Amendment protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures. Our 5th Amendment protects us against self-incrimination. But our 6th Amendment gives us the right to a fair and impartial trial, right? So should terrorists have this right? Should we treat terrorists knowing that, hey, we know that probably the vast majority of Americans are going to be aware that the terrorist has, committed this act. However, should we give them the right to have a fair trial, a fair and impartial jury? Should we look for people that have no idea who these people are and what they did, even though the crimes are so heinous and atrocious? Is our country fair when it comes to giving terrorists a chance in court to defend themselves? Well, terrorists absolutely do get their fair trial in court. And I know that can be controversial. Sorry, I moved ahead. I know that can be very controversial because for some people, the argument is that why should terrorists get a fair trial when they may have slaughtered hundreds of thousands or thousands and thousands of Americans? Because we are the freest democracy in the world. And as the freest democracy in the world, we have to understand that even though these individuals have committed deplorable and despicable acts, they are entitled to due process because the trial is being held in America. If they were tried over in North Korea or Russia or some other country, maybe not. But because they're being tried in America, due process is the law of the land. So the last thing is to look at, well, where do terrorists go? When terrorists are detained, where do they go in terms of corrections? And there's two notable places. The first is ADX Florence. It's called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. ADX Florence is a supermax prison, and no one's ever escaped from it. It's known as an escape-proof prison. Falls under the Pennsylvania system or the Pennsylvania model, which says that inmates will be locked down 23 hours a day. But that's ADX Florence. Now, most individuals who are charged with terrorism get sent to Guantanamo Bay. And apparently, every U.S. president, pretty much since President Bush, so President Obama, not so much President Trump, and then, of course, President Biden, have pledged to try to close down Guantanamo Bay. It has not happened. Even though right now, to my understanding, there's less than 100 inmates in Guantanamo Bay, and yet the amount of money that is going to Guantanamo Bay to keep that facility operating is insane. So some people are saying, why are we keeping these individuals housed there? Shouldn't we release them back to their country? And I think the smart answer is no. You don't want them to go back to their former country because they might band together and this time launch a successful terroristic attack that does not fail or that operates in a manner that will take out many, 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 many more lives. So domestic terrorism, this is a terrorism that occurs in the United States. It's often referred to as homegrown terrorism and is a form in which the victims within the country are targeted by a perpetrator. So the terroristic acts are committed against the terrorist's own fellow citizens. And so with domestic terrorism, even though, it happens here in America, it is often coined domestic terrorism because it is terrorism against the individual's own fellow citizens. Like, how could they commit this act of terrorism against their own people right here in America? So notable types of domestic terrorism included the Oklahoma City bombing that happened in the mid-1990s at the Fred T. Murrah Federal Building. It ended up killing 168 people and probably injured at least another 1,000. But the bombing was committed by Timothy McVeigh, and it was shocking because he was an American citizen. He identified and sympathized with the Taliban. He even many times was referred to as the American Taliban. But Timothy McVeigh went ahead and committed domestic terrorism against the citizens right here in America. And these are some of the images that I wanted to show you of the damage that he caused. Now, he had an accomplice, a man by the name of Terry Nichols. Nichols was, I believe, the getaway driver. He drove the van, but he did not set up the bombs. It was all McVeigh. McVeigh's bombs caused substantial damage. And as you can see, while he didn't level the Fred T. Murrah Federal Building, he caused widespread damage in Oklahoma City. So for 9/11, some people argue that 9/11 was a domestic terroristic act. The thing is that the individuals and the perpetrators who committed 9/11 were not American citizens. They were foreigners, right? So yes, it did happen on American soil, but it wasn't domestic terrorism. Now, a controversial method of domestic terrorism, like it or hate it, many people said January 6th was an incident of domestic terrorism because nobody had ever in the history of this country seen what had to be thousands of people swarm the Capitol in an effort to stop the certification of the election and allegedly report that they would hang the vice president. Again, that's a debate for a different class and a different time, but many people equated January 6th as an act of domestic terrorism. Some other notable instances of terrorism, again, 9/11, but 9/11 is considered domestic terrorism, even though technically it's not, because the foreigners were not American, but it did happen on American soil. Of course, the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, 3 people passed away, but over 260 injured. And like I said, domestic terrorism can be very controversial. Though you don't believe me, just look at January 6th and see what is said about January 6th when it comes to domestic terrorism. And of course, we should stop terrorism. We really should. We should focus hard, work hard, get to a place where we are looking to stop terrorism, stop the spread of terrorism, the ideology of terrorism, and just the belief that individuals who are going to engage in terrorism, they should be seen as an insidious threat and cancer to our society, whether they're American or they're foreign. There should be no place for terrorism. It is going to exist and it is going to take root in the hearts and minds of people. But the reason why I share this is because I do briefly talk about terrorism, at least in another class, and then I know that there's a class strictly on terrorism and homeland security. The ideology of it must be stopped. If it is stopped and you cut it off at the root, hopefully you can cause it from spreading, which means that people who like terrorism and like to engage in this type of behavior will either be, put away, or they will recognize that this mindset is not the right and stable mindset. So, moving along, I want to talk about domestic human and sex trafficking. Again, there is a course offered called Sex Trafficking. It's a very popular course. It goes over some of this stuff. What is human trafficking? It involves the violation of a person's civil rights, including the trade in humans for labor or sexual favors. There's 2 common types. Sex trafficking is a commercial sex act that is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. Or you get a child who's under the age of 18. They're engaged in a sexual act and they're sex trafficked. Or domestic servitude or labor trafficking. Recruiting, harboring, transporting, given the provision or obtaining of a person for labor or services by means of force, fraud, or coercion. Essentially, labor trafficking is nothing more than modern day slavery. So you get people from a foreign country and they're working. It's nothing more than modern day slavery. And sometimes migrant workers are viewed as domestic servitude, domestic servitude workers, but it is labor trafficking as well. Now, some other types of sex trafficking, prostitution, pornography, the erotic nude massages could be very popular in the Atlanta area. You have to be very careful if you're going to some of these places because some may offer these, but it is very illegal. You have private parties, prostitution, familial pimping, gang-based prostitution, and other forms of internet exploitation. Now, within sex trafficking, Victims may be victimized with or without their parents' knowledge, and a lot of times they're not even aware that they're being victimized. They don't know something's going on. Atlanta is a major hub. I used to tell my students in person, hey, FYI, if you're coming to Atlanta and you want to know where, you want to know what's safe, what's not safe, please reach out to me. I have family in Atlanta too, south of Fulton, but I have family over there. I want you to be safe because I know that for some people, even college students, it's possible to get caught up in a situation that you didn't really expect, and now you're kind of scrambling on how to get out of it. When it comes to minors, they get lured through a number of methods. First of all, they're given false pretenses, false promises, a modeling contract, an acting gig, because a lot of things are filmed in and around Atlanta. They may take photos of themselves or videos, and the person they're talking to may be like, oh, come on, it's me, come on. And then you send it, and now you're blackmailed. Psychological and mental mind games that can lead to physical and bodily harm of the victim, and even threatening to harm the victim's family. If you're 12, 13, 14-year-old young girl, and they're telling you that they're going to go ahead and they're going to brutally beat your mom or brutally beat your older sister, you're going to submit to their will because you don't want any harm to come on your family, as opposed to telling law enforcement or some other protected individual to find these people and get them off the street. Now, the Me Too movement, probably something that's talked about in, it's probably talked about in human trafficking, or maybe talked about in, I believe there's a course called Gender and Crime. But research indicates that rape and sexual assaults reported in low and worsening percentages. In other words, people weren't really talking about what happened to them. It wasn't until this Me Too movement, which was started by the woman right there in the middle. Her name was Tarana Burke, and that encouraged individuals and empowered individuals to open up and talk about and converse about their sexual victimization. So with the Me Too movement, we've seen a lot of people go down. And I can reference it because I've been talking about it all semester. We'll see what happens with Sean Combs, but right now it's not looking too good for him. Bill Cosby, James Franco, Harvey Weinstein, R. Kelly, all of those folks, with the exception of James Franco, is currently in jail. Well, Bill Cosby's out. He served a substantial amount of time in prison. But Kelly is probably never going to leave prison. Harvey Weinstein is probably never going to leave prison. So people, thanks to Tarana Burke, people became emboldened and empowered to talk about their victimization and say, hey, it happened to me too. You're not alone. And so let's talk about hate crimes, because that's another course we have. We do have a class called Hate Crimes. And I do enjoy talking about hate crimes as well. I talk about it in homicide. I talk about it in criminal theories. It's certainly a topic that is noteworthy and certainly worthy of having its own course. So when it comes to hate crimes are those crimes committed targeting victims and their property due to a perceived membership in a group. So you could be targeted based on your racial, ethnic makeup, or your religious or social, sexual orientation, or what gender group you identify as. A person that is ultimately convicted of a hate crime is subject to harsher punishment by the Department of Justice. But it can be very difficult. It can be different federally. It can be difficult at the state level. So you have to, be able to articulate that the individual actions spoke hate crime because they, they infringed upon the rights of this particular group, and this group is a protected group. Now, why I mentioned about infringing on the rights of this particular group is because we have to go back to the Civil Rights Act of 1871 that offered federal protection to the 14th Amendment rights after the period of Reconstruction. That period of Reconstruction, class, is so important because that period was when the South was rebuilding, as was the North, as was the country, and people who were slave, remember, June 19th, Juneteenth, is a federal holiday. So when looking at June 19th, 1865, that's when the last group of slaves was freed from Galveston, Texas. Remember, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation around January 30th of 1865. It was almost 6 months before those individuals in Galveston, Texas realized they were free, even though they were operating as if they were slaves. So Reconstruction was an important period of time because it was when the South was rebuilding, as was the North. But with that being said, you had civil rights acts that were enacted to ensure that people of color were given certain protections and rights. And we know that oftentimes, even though they had the rights on paper, they didn't have the rights, because there's still a journey even to this day on getting them to, to a place of where they are seen and they're not treated as less than. So what are some of the common hate groups within the country? Well, the Southern Poverty Law Center, or the SPLC, identified significant groups that have footing. These groups include the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, skinheads, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, and the new Black Panther Party. So again, you don't have to be labeled as a hate group just because you're white. Your ethnicity is white. You can be a hate group if you're Black. You can be a hate group if you're Hispanic. Like, all of these are other groups that are known as hate groups, and they have a significant footing here in America. Now, violence against college students is important. College campuses are dangerous places. Some of the most prevalent crimes that occur on college campuses include sexual assault, theft, battery. Women are more likely to be sexually victimized than men, and college women are less likely to report their victimization. Most of the time, they're less likely to report it because they're afraid, or they don't know what people will think. But college campuses are dangerous places. I don't take that statement lightly. I preach and ingrain in my students' heads, the ones who take me for victimology and criminal theories, the college lifestyle is a dangerous lifestyle. Don't get it twisted. Don't say, "No, Professor Fields, you don't know what you're talking about." I know very much what I'm talking about. It is a dangerous lifestyle. It's most notably considered dangerous because criminologists, when they develop lifestyle theories, named the criminal lifestyle, the high-risk lifestyle, and the college lifestyle as the three notable lifestyles. It's not my word. It's not my doctrine. This is what the evidence says. And right now, there are reports that you can access, and the newest report will come out September 30th, but there are reports you can access which show the amount of violence on campus and off campus against whatever school or university that you or anyone else attends. It is very, very dangerous. So research comes from two sources. We know that we have surveys and we have national surveys. We have surveys at specific universities. This is where people will just do a survey to state that, yes, I've been victimized. No, I haven't been victimized. College women are sexually victimized more than college men. They're less likely to report their victimization to authorities. These are some of the barriers. College men, you're more likely to be victimized by a third party. That third party could be literally another friend, a homie, someone you don't know. But I always like to say alcohol plus fighting equals a victimization. In other words, if you're going to drink alcohol, you absolutely have a chance to get into a fight. And if you get into a fight, somebody's going to be victimized. It's going to either be you or it's going to be your party. Excuse me. So our last thing as we get ready to wrap up this semester and close everything out. What about CSI? Some of you may have heard of this super popular, uber popular TV show called CSI. But there's other shows out there. There's Criminal Minds, there's Bones, there's NCIS. And unfortunately, these shows have a distorted understanding of the role of forensic science. They oftentimes believe, or will have you to believe, that DNA comes back in a jiffy. Forensic science, we always find hair fibers. we always catch our person at the end of the 60-minute or so episode. And so the media's portrayal of forensic science is very, very extensive, but it is also misleading because there is no science to the science. It's, in other words, it's mostly fiction and fabricated. There's a little science, but it's mostly fiction and fabricated because, unfortunately, the media will make it seem like forensic science evidence is quick and it's easy and it's fun and it's glamorous and you're going to get results right away, when that's not the case. It's not even true. It's not even close to being true. Some of the key misconceptions, and I'm not going to go over these, but sometimes you see crimes are solved within 45 to 60 minutes because you, the viewer, don't want to know, I have to watch 2, 3, 4 parts or forget this storyline before I find out who was the killer, right? When examining evidence, you're not doing it in dark rooms where you can't even see. Just like I have this nice light that illuminates me compared to the natural light of this room, you're not working in dark rooms. You got to be able to see in order to run tests and see what evidence is. And fingerprints are never easy to lift. Listen, fingerprints can be tough to lift. You're probably going to have to rely on seasoned veterans if you were to go into forensic science, so that way they could teach, you the ropes. Having said that, it's never easy to lift a print. We just assume, okay, we think there's a print here. Let's go ahead and put the tape down, pull it up. Bam, we got the print. That's not the case. In fact, there's not even a guarantee you're going to be able to pull the print. So there's that. And then lastly, crime scene work may not be as exciting as you think. In other words, you're not always going to be in a shootout. You as the CSI are not always going to carry a firearm. You might, but you're not always going to be in some crazy hot shot, high profile case. It's not always going to happen. Sometimes you're going to respond to cases where it's just a burglary. It's just a standard, I don't know, but you're not always going to be in a dangerous situation as the TV show would have you to believe. So the last thing is that there's a distorted understanding of the role of forensic science. This distorted reality exists, especially in the courtroom. Sometimes CSI or the CSI Effect can impact trials. So sometimes people want more forensic evidence. They want the smoking gun. They want the deep forensic evidence to be presented. But then the other side, jurors are uncritically accept any forensic evidence presented to them, and they're more likely to find a defendant guilty when it is present, and they are more likely to acquit in the absence of forensic evidence. So what this simply means is, unfortunately, if there is some forensic evidence, even if there's nothing concrete that would or would tie an individual to whatever charge or murder or whatever, the fact that some jurors will accept anything, and that might be just enough to say this person's guilty, even though all the evidence suggests otherwise, or vice versa. It is very, very controversial, to say the least. But with the CSI Effect, people are responsible for unrealistic expectations, and they are responsible for this based on technology. So for them, this tech effect is a phenomenon in which the public's increased awareness of modern technology results in the expectation of unnecessary and at times unrealistic forensic evidence at trial. This tech effect will cause people to, even though they heard all the evidence, it will certainly cause some people to have such an unrealistic expectation that if it's not good enough for them, even though the evidence is what it is, and prosecutors and defense attorneys would have argued against it, that in that case, they'll be more likely to go at a different direction with their verdict, because they'll feel like the case did not live up to the billing when it comes to the unrealistic forensic evidence and expectation. So that is our end of the road. You have made it. You have found yourself at the end. give yourself a clap. I'm going to clap for you. It's definitely been a wonderful and enjoyable semester. It's a lot when you're putting out 2-3 lectures a day, or you got to do 2 or 3 lectures a week. Obviously, the fall semester is a lot slower, but you got through it. You made it. So be proud of yourself. Congratulate yourself. Give yourself a pat on the back. I want to thank you so much for allowing me to be your professor for this course, for tuning in every week to the video lectures. Hopefully you got something great out of it. And like I said, you're not going to remember every possible thing I went over, but the one takeaway in this class, as I wrap this up, you will remember the 3 components of the criminal justice system, which are law enforcement or the police, the courts, and the corrections or correctional system. If you don't take anything from this class, take those 3 things with you. But I want to say thank you so much again. Take care. And I won't see you next time unless you just want to find yourself joining me for some other courses that I'm lecturing on and uploading as well. Take care.